Hi, listener. This is From Ideology to Unity, a spiritual journey where we let go of ego and ideological doctrine in favor of meaning, purpose, and unity as a whole. All right, so I'm going to be doing another reading and review of the Red Book of C.G.Jung because that's what I feel like doing, and I listened to that. So, hopefully you've enjoyed the episode so far. If you've listened to it, maybe you haven't listened to the other parts. And if that's the case, that's fine. And personally, I would watch it in order, but I'm not going to begrudge anyone their choice. If you're listening or watching, I'm happy that you are. So there we are. You know, I've got this bookmark, this piece of paper. I don't know why I drew it this way, but I ended up drawing this. Wait, can you see it? It's phallic. It wasn't intentionally phallic. It just is, but whatever. I'm glad you got to hear that for some reason. Okay, so where was I? Page 35. The hero that needs to be saved. Another important hero figure that in the Red Book is Isbadar, who appears in chapter 8 of Liber Secundus in a much more positive light than Siegfried, and is associated with a whole range of other meanings. Jung meets Isbadar when he is heading east on what seems like an endless road in a gorge between high mountains. Jung sees a giant figure approaching in the distance that is dressed like an ancient mythological hero from a tribal society. Jung asks the traveler who he is, and the stranger replies that his name is Isbadar, and he has come from the East to understand the people of the West and their customs. From the East, huh? What sprang to mind was, I think it's called Journey to the West, or something like that. I haven't, it's just a Chinese tale. I haven't actually watched it. I just know some things about it. Apparently the first season of Dragon Ball Z was based on it. I don't know what it's called. Jung reveals that he comes from the West and talks about its cities, people, technology, and flying machines used for long journeys. Isbadar starts to feel weak and unwell as the small beings talk in an unknown language using scientific and rational thinking. Isbadar understands the elements of nature, myths, prophecies, and magic. He becomes weak and lies on the ground, fearing he will die. Jung also starts to fear for Isbadar's destiny. Suddenly, the hero becomes smaller, and Jung places him in an egg. Jung then starts to chant ancient Vedic Indian scriptures to restore his strength. After some time, the hero is cured and reborn in the form of the Orphic god Phanes. The hero can then be taken to the cities of the West in a different form. That's interesting. That is definitely interesting. One is that Phanes, Phanes, is, I actually know this already. There's a reason why I learned this, and I'll tell you. An Orphic god, the Orphic god of creation, I think fertility as well. And if I'm correct, is that the Dacian religion? Or is that something to do with the Bosphorian religion in the ancient times involving the Greeks? I'm not sure exactly. But either way, it was influenced by the Greeks, but not entirely Greek, this religion, I think. And this Phanes was their god, or Phanes, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. And it's polytheistic or why did I say polytheistic? Pantheistic. Like the Lord One is a form of pantheism. And it makes me think, okay, well, so the ancient ways of the East have become weakened over this technology, but it can be reformulated in a way, in an egg, with this symbol of rebirth, it can be born in a form that is compatible with the new modern ways of the West. Now, if we consider how the law of one is compatible with quantum physics, and I know mainstream people who believe in mainstream scientists will rail against the idea that mysticism is compatible with quantum physics, and they really seem to feel or think, you know, that quantum is used, the word and language of quantum physics is used as an excuse to shoehorn in mysticism. And I understand it, and maybe there are some cases in which people do that in a way which is dubious, but at the same time, I do believe that whether it's in terms of Eastern philosophy, let's say, you know, and the insights of those kind of insights and pantheistic insights, I feel like, yeah, they can be reborn in a new way. And A, they can be compatible with quantum physics and perhaps string theory or M theory. B, they could be combined, they could take a new form that's compatible with Christianity. Now, the Christ consciousness is an example of this. And there's something I've ordered on Amazon, I haven't got it yet, but it's Jesus being channeled. Jesus was channeled, or the Christ consciousness was channeled. And what's it called? I'm probably going to do a reading and review of that too. But what was it called? Give me a sec. Last time I tried Googling something, it didn't, in recording, it didn't really work out. So either I remember it or I don't. But I'll probably do an episode on it later. But yeah, so there is actually channeled work on Christ, and he gave a bunch of teachings, and it's probably, I believe that it is actually Christ or Jesus of Nazareth who did ascend, and is by this point the Christ consciousness, which is, I think, a sixth density being at this point, to a thought form, and we have the Christ consciousness in all of us, and a thought form would be able to be like that. I mean, it could be fifth density, but I don't have, I get the feeling that Christ is a sixth density at this point. And obviously a sixth density being that has a strong connection to a lot of us on Earth, Earthlings. So, yeah, there's also the Unity Church. Now, I've heard some people, I can't remember if it's the Distributist or Settlers Lament. They're on YouTube. They're actually kind of interesting to me, though, those two channels. But despite being Catholic, I think. But like, they're, anyway, why did I mention them again? They said something about something. I lost track of my thoughts there. Okay. So they were saying about the Unity Church, one of them was, and that it's kind of, maybe they might have described it as woke, or wet in some sense, like it's to them that they see it as like watering down the key principles and being a bit too wishy-washy, hippie-ish, I suppose, which is precisely the sort of thing that spirituality that I prefer. So I don't know. I would say, on one hand, I would hope that spirituality is focused more on genuinely mystical ideas, right? And not so much on shoehorning identity politics into spirituality. If anything, influencing, or if I were to be really, if I were to be honest, potentially even, now shoehorning involves dishonesty, doesn't it? What's that, the equivalent of that, but with dishonesty and not actually trying to deceive and manipulate people? We're just influencing people openly, just like, look, here is my perspective, da, 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 da. Anyway, so if we could offer an alternative, okay, if people who are interested in identity politics encounter spirituality in their own way, and if it takes the form of something like the Unity Church, and if that entails some degree of identity politics in Christianity, or at least in that church or whatever, but they get exposed to mysticism and ideas that like the Christ consciousness and stuff, and if through that they gradually start to actually get more into mysticism and shadow work, and basically I gradually get, you know, into Great Awakening ideas or Law of One ideas even, I would say that if it means that people can get from the divisive us versus them fear and ego identity of identity politics, and get from that to unity consciousness and integrating the shadow and awakening, essentially, I would say that there being more identity politics in things like the Unity Church would be okay. And in fact, that's okay. You know, I wouldn't complain about that. I mean, certainly, personally, people have a right to whatever views they want. And if that's the path that they take, I mean, that's okay, right? I mean, maybe some people who believe in identity politics and don't agree with mysticism of any kind might resent me saying this, which would be understandable. But the thing is, I'm not talking about shoehorning per se or tricking them into becoming spiritual. Can you really do that anyway? Can you really control people's beliefs? Well, technically you can. It's called brainwashing or indoctrination, but how is that even done? It's done by certain means, which I'm not willing to do. I know some people would say the Law of One is a cult, but cults tend to be quite exclusive. Like, you're in this group and you need to follow the authority figures, and the authority figures tell you what to do, and you're kind of restricted gradually and cut off from the outside world and other people. The Law of One seems to be inclusive and encourage more connection with others and the like. So yeah, so I don't think that's really comparable. Yeah, but I would understand if they have concerns, but it's fundamentally perhaps introducing people who are for one way or another into identity politics or on the left or what have you, to mysticism, the ideas of mysticism and the ideas of Christian ideas framed in a more Christ conscious kind of way. It appeals to people in the West who are, well, from the West, and thus can relate to Christianity more. And even if they're atheist, even if they're, or, you know, if they don't like Christianity, they're still being exposed to Christianity more probably than other religions. And our culture as a whole, even while largely secularized, is very much influenced by Christianity, and there's no denying that. I feel that we can't just throw Western philosophy and tradition out the window and be like, okay, it's all just sky god, and controlling rules and draconian influence, and so back. No, we can't do that. We can't do that. I feel like the Christian kind of mindset can be reformulated and perhaps, in a sense, reborn, but also brought back to what it originally was meant to be in the first place. Something more like Gnosticism, something more like, we believe in reincarnation. And in a way, it's bringing Christianity back to its roots. It's uncorrupting it back to what it was before the Roman psyop called the Council of Nicaea, and other similar, basically, attempts to control by authority what people were allowed to believe in when it comes to Christianity. In a sense, it could be like rewinding the clock, but in a sense, it could be something new as well. And that seems to be drawing upon the law of one and drawing from Christianity and fusing it together with a sort of Christ consciousness sort of thing, in the sort of way that the Unity Church seems to be doing, although I admit I could do a lot more research on exactly who the Unity Church is and what it's doing, but I'm going on my impression here. So, I'm willing to accept that there's subjectivity and bias that I have here. Which reminds me, if I compare myself to the sort of approach we have to that of people who very much believe in the scientific paradigm, or the positivist paradigm, is that we're a lot more willing to accept bias and the inevitability to some extent of it. And I guess that means my perspective has more in common with how to describe them, postmodernists, or perhaps even post-structuralists, than I would have necessarily like. But I mean, the old me certainly would have, did rail against things like critical theory and the like. And perhaps postmodernists actually are onto something. Although I very much prefer, I look at things more in a spiritual way. So that completely changes what form it takes. It's not just, it's not really, I mean, you could view it as sophistry, but ultimately, if you're actually acknowledging the reality is shaped by us, perhaps in a more literal way than even postmodernists believe, I would say that's preferable. So anyway, so what I was talking about is those of maybe more postmodern sort of mindset, those of a mindset influenced by identity politics and left-wing ideas, left-wing and inverted commas, because these different labels over it, ultimately list labels, and perhaps open to quantum physics and string theory and such ideas, and that the loosening of objectivity involved in the quantum mindset, quantum physics, how observing affects the results. These things connect up, and I feel that in the West, a rebirth or formulated Eastern ideas in a way compatible for the West is certainly, it aids Eastern ideas in a sense, and it aids Western ideas, and it's also you could say a unison of opposites. And through this, we can help East and West and help people awaken. That feels right to me. And I'm sure, I wouldn't say that's what Jung had in mind or how Jung interpreted it, but I like this interpretation of it is Debar. I actually said it correctly there. Huh. I like that it did Vedic Indian, Jung actually did chanting, Vedic chanting, you know, the two. Okay, so the author God Venice. What's interesting about that? Well, I was doing a side project of mine, an idea I've got about this, starting writing and world building this alternative Space Marine chapter. If you know about Warhammer 40k, you might know what I'm talking about. Just a Space Marine chapter that I'm coming up with. I wouldn't mention it otherwise yet, but the reason I mention it is that I was doing research on pantheism, because that's one of the themes I'm coming up with for the chapter, in a way that would be compatible with the Imperial Creed in Warhammer 40k, the idea of the Emperor being in everyone's hearts, you know, basically making worship of the Emperor pantheistic. Yeah, I know, heresy, right? So anyway, I was doing research for that, and what I came across is Orphism. Now, Orphism is, and their god was Fernez, right? And then I started this episode, and lo and behold, I would start reading, and I come across the Orphic god Fernez. Synchronicity, right? That's why I mentioned it. So there must be some significance in that. Or maybe I just happened to read it, but, you know, I'm not going to believe that. How dull will that be? Also, you know, I have faith. This moment in which Izdabar is cured through magic rituals is so mysterious that Jung uses beautiful symbolic illustrations to describe the process. The transformation that occurs when the afflicted god is cured and contained in a reduced form inside an egg cannot be described using rational language alone. Perhaps symbolic illustrations are the only way this process can be explained. Nietzsche famously declared that God is dead. Contrary to this, Izdabar's process of cure and restoration speaks of the assimilation of an ancient god into the symbolic inner space and his restoration to take on a different form, the symbolic image. Jung would later write in the commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower, 1957, that the classical gods did not die, but are renovated and provoke a large variety of symptoms that can be seen on the therapist's couch. Interesting. I mean, in the book Synchronicity, it's mentioned that there was this one guy who Jung was treating, a schizophrenic, so-called schizophrenic anyway, who seemed to believe he was a sun god, like a Mithridatic sun god or something. And yeah. I'm reminded of that for some reason. Quote, the gods have become diseased. No, not quoting the sun god guy, just something else. Quote, the gods have become diseases. Zeus no longer rules Olympus, but rather the solar plexus, and produces curious symptoms for the doctor's consulting room, or disorders the brains of politicians and journalists who unwittingly let loose psychic epidemics on the world. Page 37. Jung's meeting with Izdabar represents the confrontation between conscious rational thinking, Jung, and unconscious mythological thinking, Izdabar. Well, that fits into what I was talking about as well. The idea of rational scientific thought and, quote, irrational unconscious mythological thinking, say mysticism, Law of One, and integrating it with quantum physics, much to the chagrin of mainstream scientists and advocates of mainstream science. I feel like that can help resolve that duality, because ultimately we're moving away from duality. We're in the age of Aquarius. It's about time, right? The various illustrations of this meeting reveal Jung as a small, respectful being compared to the gigantic Izdubar. The hero represents the entire tradition that humanity carries, including all of its acquisitions and lessons learned, stored in the form of an ancestral memory in the collective unconscious. Faced with this, the values of the conscious seem small. Oh, and there's a reason why, based on all the modern technology and stuff, this spiritual, this symbol of mythology and spirituality and mysticism, whatever, it shrinks. It shrinks to a tiny size. It's very much afflicted. It falls down like it's unwell. And that has been what we've been seeing, right? It's not just in the West because it's been exported around the world. And well, there's the whole issue of repression as well as a result of not having that. But I won't go into that so much. And we've got this whole issue, but we're in the age of Aquarius, end of duality. What are we going to do to integrate these two together? Well, in quantum physics, in string theory, and amp theory and the like, the advances, especially the more recent ones, of physics that actually are compatible with it. And when we go with the electric universe theory, or is it magnetic universe theory is another way of looking at it, I'm not sure. This is something talked about on the YouTube channel. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. It talks about space weather. Wow, my memory is really reliable. So, anyway, it goes like, eyes open, no fear, that guy. Anyway, there's a YouTube channel that talks about this. What's it? He refers to something called the Weatherman's Guide to the Sun, I think. Oh, I'd Google it. You might be able to find it. No, don't Google it. No, DuckDuckGo it. No, they did pay me to say that. So, would I accept it if they did pay me to say that? I don't know. So, so then, yeah, that's represented by that way we could unite the opposites and in a way compatible with science. That would require a scientific paradigm shift. The reason part of why that hasn't happened is that mainstream science has deliberately been made unaware, ensured that they are unaware of the of data that kind of completely really would change the paradigm. Why hasn't that happened? So that people remain unaware of spiritual truths. Now the elites know about this, but they don't want people awakening. Very inconvenient for their plans. So it really is. But oh well, their loss and their inconvenience. Even so, the small figure of Jung, with his rational thinking and scientific logic, seems in some way lethal to the hero god who quickly becomes unwell. Here we see a beautiful poetic metaphor for the destructive power that the goddess of reason can have over symbolic thinking. Is that Athena? I'm not sure. Jung's meeting with Izdubar is one of the most important passages in the Red Book, as it talks about the recovery of mythological thinking through the imagination. When Izdubar falls grievously ill and is lying on the ground close to death, Jung becomes seriously concerned with his survival. A radical transformation in the size of these characters then takes place. The enormous god becomes very small and placed in an egg. According to Gaston Bachelard, 1989, changes in size are an essential element in daydreams. In this case, the transformation is from very large, the powerful god of mythological antiquity, to the very small, the god in a state of incubation inside the egg. It is essential that Izdubar changes in size in order to survive, or in other words, that he changes from being something literal to being something symbolic. Well, what if the whole universe is symbolic, eh? What if reality is symbolic? What if objective reality doesn't exist? In which case it's simply symbolic and real and not really lose its power, right? The key to this symbol is the way that the God is kept alive. Jung comes from the West, bringing technology, rational thinking, and practicality. And repression, but that's not, well, no, he kind of, never mind, I got that. I wouldn't say he brought repression of subconscious content. He was more talking about it. But the rational thinking is the cause of that, or something a cause. And the God brings wisdom of mythology and ancestral experience from the East. The indicated path involves the fusion of both, as rationality should not suffocate the mythological, but shelter it under the mantle of a symbolic tool. The psychology of the unconscious is the way to maintain these traditional symbols. And what springs to mind is something actually posted about on the Facebook group, which from Ideology to Unity Facebook group, which I recommend you take a look at, unless of course you don't like Facebook, which is understandable. Perhaps I should have a group that isn't on Facebook for my podcast. Anyway, so I made a post today. It's actually talking about Ahriman. No, not from 40K, not from Warhammer 40K, although that's an interesting comparison. Given that the Ahriman in the dualistic, I think it's a representation of chaos, darkness, something like that. In Iranian mythology, Zoroastrian mythology, there's Zoroaster versus, Zoroaster's the prophet, but I don't know. There's a good god and then there's the bad god or whatever, and it's dualistic, or at least something like that. And Ahriman is the quote bad god, or the darkness or chaos or whatever. And apparently, according to this article that I posted in the group, if you look at the cross as representing these four different beings, whether literally or symbolically, representing different things. There's Christ at the top. That represents ascension. On the left, there's Lucifer. On the right, part of the cross, there's Ahriman. And then the bottom part, there's a term I can't remember, but it represents the unconscious and the Antichrist. So basically, first of all, the context here, Lucifer here is not understood as the same thing as Satan, or as regular Christianity talks about it, because as a lot of people know in New Age circles, that it's not the same thing at all, and the Bible's heavily distorted. So the way it describes it in the article is that Lucifer is the sort of incarnated 3,000 years before Christ and influenced a lot of pagan spirituality, but that it's a sort of, it's not, that in a sense, there's a sort of being out of touch with the body involved in it, maybe with plant medicine, maybe not. I'm not sure if it explicitly said that. And there's a form of paganism that it's where it's egoic. It's still egoic, where the ego becomes spiritual rather than transcending the ego. Perhaps spiritual bypassing is linked with that, perhaps not. And that's on the left side. And the opposite of that, and unison of opposites is key here to go upwards, descending with Christ. The opposite of that is Ahriman. Now, what does Ahriman represent? According to the article, at the very least, Ahriman represents the material world. So perhaps it represents chaos and a material, different from 40K, which is the immaterial. And in Warhammer 40K, Ahriman is a champion of Tzeentch, who is a chaos god of the immaterium. So that's an interesting contrast there from Zoroastrianism and what's being talked about in the article. In the article, it was talking about Ahriman, and the idea with Ahriman is that it's about, you know, like all this modern, think like modern technology and material things, and the soul, spirit, or the heart going out of or driven out of the body, and it all be about purely the body. And it seems to be what the Cabal wants for us, the cybernetic. Cybernetic's not the word, but you know, it works. Cybernetic agenda, or yeah, cyborg agenda, whatever. That wants us integrated in machines and enslaved by machines, and that whole stuff, all that horrible stuff they want for us, that won't happen, or at least not. I don't know about negative timelines, but let's not go into that. Not right now, anyway. So there's this opposites, right? And the idea is through unison of opposites, you have a synthesis, and that's what the Christ consciousness is about, which suggests to me that if we want to ascend, we need to perhaps, we can't just rely on drugs. We can't just like, oh, let's just take ayahuasca. Take ayahuasca, yay. I'm taking ayahuasca so I can be a preacher now. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. You've got to really do inner work, meditating, as the Buddhists do, that sort of thing, you know, really do the inner work. And at the same time, you can explore, you know, you can explore the fun parts of spirituality, so to speak, like, you know, leaving your body in, what's it called? Oh, wow, I remember, it's really reliable, isn't it? So like, you can take ayahuasca as well if you want, you know, but you know, you don't just do one or the other. What you do is you do the hard work of spirituality, not just going all airy-fairy and like out of touch with your body. Like, you are incarnated with a body on Earth at this time for a reason. Escapism isn't going to help. You've got to be grounded in your body and on the Earth. At the same time, you've got to explore the mystical, spiritual side of things as well. And we can integrate that together, and embody the Christ consciousness. But there's another aspect of things on a more maybe collective level, where this unison of opposites can be represented in another way, in the same way as in a way that is unison of Izdabar and Jung, I suppose. And through or like mysticism and science. And we can do that through combining advances in physics, through the, you know, because physics has finally managed to get to a point where, even though there's a lot being covered up by the elites, it's starting to get to an area where physics is actually starting to uncover the mystical side of things. Let's put it that way. Although they would be very much go out of the way not to put it that way. It's funny that we've had quantum physics for so long now, like a century pretty much, and yet it's almost like it's been held back in some way, because there were these serious implications of it. I mean, and the original quantum physicists were like overtly mystical in certain ways. They were overtly influenced by mysticism, but the mystical implications of it were even more than implications. They're just being overlooked. Because it's just inconvenient for the elites, right? So there's actually solid science. I mean, the electric universe theory, which is, oh, it's just fringe pseudoscience, of course. It has to be pseudoscience. If it in any way implies or suggests or shows outright, explicitly, empirically, that the paradigm, the materialist paradigm is not the whole picture, it must be pseudoscience, of course. And, but yeah, perhaps to actually, there's becoming more and more people moving away from just sticking to the paradigm. And in mainstream physics as well, from what I hear. So yeah, and on a collective level, on integrating these two, the East and the West, or is Debye and Jung, or science and mysticism, that perhaps is, you know, as below, so above, as above, so below, on the same, it's the same principle on another scale, perhaps, as the idea of the left and right side of the cross, being those unisons, the opposite being unified, leading upwards to ascension with the Christ consciousness. And the alternative being, if you have an imbalance of these two things, are you going too far one way or too far the other, or manifesting both at the same time negatively? That's unconsciousness. Down, alignment with the Antichrist consciousness. I mean, if you're spiritually bypassing and you're not integrating your shadow, unconsciousness it is, Antichrist consciousness it is, which is just the opposite of consciousness, really. So Antichrist and unconsciousness, perhaps that's a better way of putting it. Yeah, and or if you go too materialistic and denying the spiritual side even existing and denying the spiritual side of yourself, that's more unconscious as well. So okay, so let's carry on reading, huh? Where was I? Another important aspect of this meeting with Debye is the use of illustration, which represents a non-verbal approach. Since Anna O, the fictitious name of Joseph Breuer's and Freud's famous patient, Bertha Pappenheim, psychotherapy has been described as a talking cure. But during the early beginnings of the Jungian method, we see examples of ways towards a non-verbal cure, or through a range of other expressive techniques. For example, the mandala, right? Jung and the authors of the Jungian school always valued the use of nonverbal techniques in psychotherapy, putting emphasis on the use and techniques such as drawing, model painting, perhaps 140K model painting, just putting it out there, and sand play therapy, which can be used to express unconscious content. About things like that, it's a grimdark setting. But I mean, if you've got pent up negative emotions, perhaps that's the perfect setting to express it creatively. So yeah, just a thought. And they didn't pay me to say that, honest. A third important aspect of the encounter with the hero Debye is the name of the character himself. Debye was in fact the ancient Sumerian hero Gilgamesh from the epic Gilgamesh, King of Uruk. The name Debye was changed to Gilgamesh in text before the Liber Novus was written, and Jung was aware of this. For more information on the name Debye, see Anne Casament's interview with Shamdazani in Casement 2010. Why then did he use the name Debye? This is yet another confirmation that the range of ancient mythological characters from Old and New Testament in the Red Book are actually personifications of Jung's unconscious material, referred to by Shamdazani as a personal cosmology. That is pretty interesting. Gilgamesh. So I take it he wasn't the Gilgamesh in Plate Zero, right? Okay. Yeah. So Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, the Sumerian mythological figure, who may well have been one of the Anunnaki. I mean, he was literally a giant by comparison, right? Something else I've come across is the idea that the Anunnaki might not have actually been from Nibiru at all, but have actually incarnated, well, literally giants. And the idea that they're reptilian aliens that came to us is deliberate misrepresentation of things to distort things. I don't know. That's just something I've heard. Who said it? Who said it? Who's actually said that? I can't remember the name of the guy. Anyway, what else do I think about this? What does Gilgamesh represent? I mean, I'm not sure. What is it? What did it represent in Jung's subconscious? I don't know. I don't know. Could be something in the collective unconscious, though. So, well, I mean, we've already been talking about what it represents. So I won't overanalyze the use of the fellow's Gilgamesh. It just evokes a sort of mightiness, I suppose. But perhaps deliberate use of the word Izdabar meant that, in a sense, it evoked Gilgamesh, but in a sense it didn't, because to most people, they don't know that. But maybe it was written partly for himself, in which case Jung did know that, so whatever. What do I think of this section that I was reading? Well, I feel like it's really interesting stuff about unison of opposites and how what change, I get a sense of what must change in this coming age of Aquarius, like of rebirth. Yeah, and to me, this previous vision that he saw of the death of Siegfried, I mean, this is all related to me to the end of the age of Pisces, the beginning of the coming age of Aquarius, and Jung being a prophet of the age of Aquarius, in a sense. I don't mean literally a prophet, but who knows? Maybe he was. Chapter 5, the limits between creativity and madness. Quote, the God is near and hard to grasp, but where there is danger, a rescuing element grows as well. Hölderlin, Patmos, 1984. There's certainly danger, isn't there, this last year and this coming year. There really is a sense of danger. But that's where change comes, and change can be, well, it can be a rescue or a resolution to crisis and the causes that haven't been dealt with. So it had to get this dark before the new dawn, before the new cycle. I mean, end of the cycle is going to be like that, right? It's not going to be a nice and tidy process. Although I've heard from feel good, that just sounds like feels good, you know, a feel good, but although he's got a feel good guy, I guess. Phil, as in Philip, good, the YouTuber, he channels the Arcturians and stuff. He said that, what did he say? He said that the Arcturians claimed that there was actually a timeline in which it was completely smooth, where none of these issues that we're having, like all of this incredibly bumpy ride that we're having, technically it is avoidable. It just would require basically everyone on earth being the best selves, which makes it technically possible, but it's not so surprising that's not happening. It's just a reminder that it could always be smoother. It could always be done better. And that's okay. That's just part of reality with as many possibilities, as many timelines. There's another quote here. But the spirit of the depths has gained this power because I had spoken to my soul during 25 nights in the desert, and I had given her my love and submission. But during the 25 days, I gave all my love and submission to things, to men and to thoughts of this time. I went into the desert only at night. Jung, Liber Novus, 2009, page 238. Only at night. I mean, night represents the unconscious, so he was exploring the unconscious. I mean, it evokes Jesus in a sense. The madness of Miss Miller. In 1911, a little while before having the first inner experiences that would later give rise to the Red Book, Jung published Symbols of Transformation, which was to be the turning point for separation from Sigmund Freud. The book was based on the travel logs of a young American woman, though he never knew her personally. Jung thought that the images and poetry in Frank Miller's journal revealed that she could be a schizophrenic, leading him to use the title An Analysis to the Prelude to a Case of Schizophrenia, 1911. The book was published just 2 years after Jung had abandoned his position as a medical assistant at the Burgosoli Psychiatric Hospital. There he had followed hundreds of cases of schizophrenia over years and noticed archetypal mythological content emerging from these patients, as though their personal psyche seemed to be invaded by archetypal content. Perhaps there's an outright mystical cause of that, but I won't go into that now. Beyond that. However, Jung's pessimistic prognosis in relation to Miss Miller was mistaken. Shamdazani's research now demonstrates that Miss Miller had become a student of the professor and Swiss academic Theodore Flournoy and had studied under him for a term at the University of Geneva, Shamdazani 1990. Miss Miller did not present any symptoms of psychosis. On the contrary, she was a very social and talkative lady, and had traveled to various countries in Asia, and particularly in Eastern Russia, and upon returning to the United States, had continued to lecture on her ethnological experiences. On her travels, she kept a journal of her experiences, in which she wrote poems and mythological tales. One of these includes the Chihuantopal hero figure, a character that emerged spontaneously in Miss Miller's fantasies. She also included the Song of the Moth, which tells the story of a moth that burns after being irresistibly drawn to a flame. According to Jung, these and other images contained in the book suggest that they were written while the author was psychologically fragile. Well, they might have been, actually, but at the same time, what this shows us is that it shows us that in ordinary people, the sheer amount of mythological content that can be found there. I don't think Jung had reason to worry about his sanity, though I'm sure perhaps he did when he wrote the Red Book and the Black Books especially. And, you know, we're aware of it. I mean, in Jung's research, I mean, he came across a lot of examples of ordinary people drawing mandalas just naturally, without external influence and independently. So, yes, that's something he definitely came across, and we see in Jung's work. And it fits in with the idea of the collective unconscious. We can see the theme of the death of the hero that appears in the Red Book among Miss Miller's images. Unlike Miss Miller, who identifies more the themes of the hero and heroism, in Liber Nobis, Jung takes a very different position as Siegfried's assassin. Aided by a figure of the unconscious, the trickster, Jung prepares a cunning ambush in order to destroy Siegfried, who symbolizes the heroic attitude that he needs to overcome. From Miss Miller's point of view, the destruction of Chiwantopol is seen as threatening and terrible, as the ego still identifies with the old heroic attitude, even though the unconscious is already calling for change. It is important to remember that the mythological hero dies early and no hero dies an old man, as the phase of old age belongs to the cycle of the wise old man. I mean, there are stories where a hero becomes a wise old man, but that might be when a previous hero became an old wise old man. But then maybe not. Maybe hero stories tend to involve the hero dying. I'm not sure. I see no reason to believe why a hero archetype figure can't become wise old man archetype figure. It would suggest that wise old men archetypes never act heroic. That doesn't add up to me. I don't know. So, So the destruction of Chiwantopol is seen as threatening and terrible. And certainly Jung is taken aback by the idea that he had a vision of killing Siegfried. But killing Siegfried he was. And he was doing it with the trickster. And well, this is why the renunciation of the hero is so important, as he dies after he has completed his task, leaving the world of the conscious and returning to the collective unconscious, where he came from. This is an important teaching that comes from the mythology of the hero. Also, it suggests an end of the hero's journey being important for humanity. Perhaps. So, is this saying that in order to ascend, part of that is letting go of the hero's journey? But that doesn't necessarily preclude the idea of the hero's journey actually being involved in the ascension process. Because it could be involved, have a lot of last blast in the end of the age of Pisces and even the beginning of the age of Aquarius. Maybe the ascension could be the final stage of the hero's journey, but where instead of repeating the cycle, we exit that circle and enter a new circle. Because after all, what is a spiral? But it's a circle that goes up or down, or in a different, that goes perpendicular to, on a new direction relative to the circle. If you had third dimension, you get a spiral, you go round in a circle, but then you're going in a certain direction or another. That's what you get as a spiral. And everything, so you get spirals in a lot of things. Like in space, for example. So, like, and if anything, the whole hero's journey might have been cycling up in a sense anyway. I don't know. As we gain more and more consciousness and get towards a point towards the end of the age of Pisces where we can possibly ascend. So, and to take off from this, it's like there's a train going round and round and round, but the train can grow wings and fly. So there was this really amusing GIF, I suppose. It's kind of a meme as well. And it was this, I don't know why it comes to mind, but sorry, I'm doing this. So there was this anime girl, right? And she transformed into a plane and took off and flew, right? It's quite funny. I find it funny anyway. And I just got this idea of it, instead of the anime girl, it's a train. And the train, what, Transformers? It's like Transformers, Jesus Christ. Okay, so yes, so if you like the Transformers, you should like this. Yes, there's a train transformer, and he transforms into a plane, yes. And that plane takes off and spirals round and round, up and up and up. And that is our ascension. There we go. I actually did this. Yeah, the point is, we leave this repeating circle into a new upward cycle in the new age. Madness and renewal in times of transition. I've already commented that Jung was mistaken with his prognosis that Miss Miller represented a case of imminent psychosis, though perhaps my metaphor about the train might indicate imminent psychosis. Just saying. Jung could be wrong once more, but this time regarding himself. Upon noticing similar and very intense archetypal images emerging in his mind, including those of Europe covered in the notion of dead bodies, he began to suspect he was becoming psychologically unwell. See chapter 2. These feelings and his errors in evaluation are understandable if we consider that the ego is accustomed to the standard orientation of the conscious and its everyday experiences. The images of the collective unconscious that emerge are completely new and can cause feelings of discomfort and foreboding. This phenomenon occurs during a times of transition where when the archetype of the self is activated, a total renewal of personality can take place. These characteristics are part of what John Perry John Perry, 1974, named the renewal syndrome of the personality. And also, I mean, I highly suspect that Jung was, well, he was individuating, he was integrating his shadow. And I mean, there's a journey and there's a number of stages you go through to get to the point where we can do that. So he had probably already gone through psychologically a journey to get to that point of development. So yeah. So it's going to be bumpy, right? As these images in the conscious are so intense, the ego, when questioned, tries to understand them according to its usual references. I mean, naturally, right? However, when the conscious can use mechanisms such as archetypal symbols to develop and integrate all of this changing energy, as was the case for Jung, there is a high possibility that the personality will develop as a result. Well, that would be a good thing as well, right? Well, that's a judgment, but yeah. You have to try new things to grapple with the difficulty, bumpy road of individuation. This assimilation of new values from the unconscious is a gradual process and can usually be observed in patients over the space of many years. These intense experiences coming from the world of the archetypes can sometimes threaten the equilibrium of the conscious. This situation is common in adolescents who are generally going through a huge process of transition. The traditional values they are taught by their family are no longer sufficient, and they are driven by the self in search of new existential meaning to question their old values in search of their own. Minor serious personal crises can be observed at this stage of life, and these are often spiritual in nature. Archetypal symbols usually emerge in the fantasies of what seem to be irrational ideas. This can reach the stage of a significant spiritual crisis, but if young patients are able to integrate the archetypal energy into their conscious, they can undergo significant psychological growth. Also, I would add that if they don't make that growth as teenagers, opportunities will come up later on, and they may in their 20s or in the 30s, the 40s, there will be repeating opportunities to do this. Because in a sense, it would be negative or harsh to say someone's underdeveloped, potentially, definitely undeveloped if they haven't integrated their shadow in their teen years. But perhaps underdevelopment is normal in our society, so we don't realize mental illness is so widespread in our society. Perhaps our society is genuinely sick, in a sense, mentally ill. So, I mean, there's this idea of in tribal societies, you go out into the wilderness, go through these trials of testing, and you become a man as a result. And part of this might be that it at least contributes to individuation, even if they weren't necessarily aware of that in those societies on a psychological or conscious level. And I think this is something Jung alluded to as well. Okay. Liber Novus, as has already been mentioned, was written at a time of transition during Jung's midlife crisis. As part of the process, he recalled his confrontation with the unconscious in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. There have been many interpretations that suggest that at the time of this radical experience, Jung may have been mentally disturbed or suffering from moments of psychological disorientation that he later overcame. These are difficult questions to answer in full, but they are still very important and should be approached with care. As mentioned in chapter 2, the gestation of the book, Jung's midlife crisis can be seen as part of the development of the Red Book only relatively. Although this was an important time of transition, referred to by the ancient Greeks as metanoia, meaning change of mind, it occurs as a result of the accumulation of previous experience and is the expression of Jung's personal myth. But to what extent were the limits between normal and pathological crossed by Jung during this transition? A range of sources discuss Jung's psychological stability during the writing of this extremely symbolic book, and it is important to remember that Jung himself doubted his own sanity at first. I mean, it's understandable if you're seeing having visions and stuff. That's not normal, though keep in mind that normal isn't. Normal and abnormal often taken in normative terms. Prescriptive terms, this idea that you should be normal and you shouldn't be abnormal, but perhaps you need to be a bit insane by society's standards to really make development anyway. The schizophrenic that cured himself. The English psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott wrote a famous and highly controversial review on Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, 1989. Winnicott argues that Jung was the victim of early trauma, and according to Jung, his mother became depressed and was admitted to hospital, leaving the family home. As a baby, Jung suffered as a result of his parents' separation and developed allergic eczema. Skin disease is known to be a typical manifestation of early disruptions in the relationship when a baby and his primary caregiver. Since then, Jung had problems developing a feeling of unification of the self, his first and second personalities, which he was only able to achieve towards the end of his life. Jung also had difficulty expressing his negative emotions in relation to his parents. His childhood fantasy of God defecating on a church reveals aggressive impulses in relation to his father that were never fully consciously worked through, requiring them to emerge in the conscious in this more symbolic form. Winnicott bases this interpretation on Melanie Klein's object relations theory, involving partially and fully internalized objects. Children can only experience a total representation of a complete object during a phase of psychological maturity that comes after what is known as the depressive position. In that, according to Winnicott, Jung had a rare case of childhood schizophrenia and later managed to cure himself. Page 484. I've also come across the idea that schizophrenia can be a good thing that can lead to development and can be a temporary stage. And in fact, there is a woman, I think she did a TED talk about schizophrenia, schizophrenics being shamans, I think, or maybe I'm connecting things that aren't connected, but if I'm correct, she talked about, maybe I'm thinking of a different YouTube video, I'm not sure, but there's this woman and she was talking about her experience where she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and she was given these pills and it made things dramatically worse. And she stopped taking them and started following the symbolic clues that in her visions and stuff. And by following the clues, she actually cured herself. So yeah, that fits to me. In a recent book, Jungian analyst Donald Kalshed provides an important reflection on the issues raised by Winnicott 2013. Winnicott's interpretations are not consistent with the information that Jung provided on his early years of his autobiography. His first memories reveal him to have been very happy with an almost indescribable sense of well-being and connection to his surrounding environment. The disappearance of his maternal figure seems to have happened at a later stage, after his third year, when his sense of identity had already been established. Though there might be something to what the guy said, but at the same time, it might not be as true to the extent that he thought it was. Without a doubt, manifestations of original forces that had not being fully integrated into consciousness can be detected on various occasions, and this took place only later through the writing of Liber Novus. Therefore, the writing of this book was a way in which Jung worked through primitive elements in his unconscious, creating a new therapeutic method in the process. Winnicott's interpretation are therefore wrong, although it should be recognized that Jung sometimes had difficulty in recognizing elements of his personal unconscious in certain symbolic manifestations, and was quick to assign the archetypal or prophetic character. The dream about the underground phallus, with all the mythological implications it contains, possessed natural elements associated with Jung's psychosexual development. The idea of a god that defecates on a church reveals impulses of aggression towards his father, perhaps symbolically in a sort of synchronicity. It's the idea of we can be in touch with spirituality and God without relying on authority. Kalshed studied the issue of early trauma in a range of patients and detected the presence of what he calls a personal archetypal spirit, which requires protection during traumatic experiences. He also suggests that early trauma can open up pathways to mystical experiences of an archetypal nature, and that these can also have a transformative effect on personality. This archetypal spirit also opens up new dimensions of perception and creativity. This was the kind of creative process that unfolded for Jung. I mean, maybe before our lives, sometimes we choose to have such experiences growing up for that reason. It's a sort of catalyst, a source of growth, even if it's difficult. Inspired madness. There are two passages in particular from Liber Novus in which Jung deals with the limits of the normal and the pathological, and how conventional approaches to this problem may be destructive and harmful. The first of these is the description found in Liber Primus of a descent into hell in the future, where the author faces his shadows. Here he comments, "When the desert begins to bloom, it brings forth strange plants. You will consider yourself mad, and in certain sense, you will in fact be mad. To the extent that Christianity of this time lacks madness, it lacks divine life. Take note of what ancients taught us in images. Madness is divine. Page 238. Well, I love that. That is great. And there's a sort of soullessness, impotence, perhaps, to what Christianity has become. And I don't mean in that it's not going on crusades. I mean, what it had become at that point was actually, in a sense, impotent, in the sense that everything was externalized. And there were these mythological figures that we dealt with, and like representing different archetypes, like in pagan gods and stuff, pagan deities. And while they culted paganism to some extent with patron saints, and there were still mythological figures even in Christian times, in a sense of, let's say, the trickster or what have you, in stories, something perhaps was lost, and some of the life was in faith was lost. Perhaps it was a lack of feminine energy, and that was a manifestation of that, a symptom. Here we see a clear questioning of the ways in which modernity approaches the theme of madness, and the problems that result from the issue not being sufficiently dealt with by the classification systems of modern psychiatry, which already relies on pills, and psychology. Shamdasani adds Jung's words under the guise of a commentary about how madness was dealt with in antiquity, the theme of divine madness. He cites the various forms of madness that Socrates mentions in the Phaedrus, written by Plato. Socrates distinguished 4 types of divine madness. 1, inspired divination, as seen with the oracle at Delphi. 2, cases in which individuals, when the old sins lead to cases in which individuals, when old sins lead to perturbations. So that's why perturabo in 140K is called perturabo. He's perturbed. Anyway, lead to perturbations, burst forth as prophecies and incite prayer and worship. That one's familiar. 3, possession by the muses. The man of technique, untouched by the madness of the muses, will never be a good poet. True. I think so. 4, the lover. Page 238. Yeah, I mean, people, it's a Roman trope, but people, they're in love and they act crazy. It's an intense passion, right? Or they're infatuated, you know, one or the other. But either way, it fits into the archetype of the lover. He also cites the humanist Erasmus of Rotterdam, who in his essay Eloge de la Folie, in praise of folly, mentions 2 types of madness, the madness of men and inspired madness, Erasmus 1511. The latter is transcendental and divine in nature, and was also recognized by Christianity. Well, that's something in favor of Christianity at the time, I suppose. This comment refers to the altered states of consciousness that were evoked in ancient Greece, and were seen as existing within the parameters of creativity. The madness of the Pythia, a religious inspiration, of man during the creative process inspired by a muse, and the lover do not fit within the strict limits of normality as described by modern science. Jung uses transcultural comparison to demonstrate that our definition of normality does not make sense. The so-called madness was held as sacred in antiquity, and the creative man inspired by the muse is also outside of what is considered normal, as were the attendants of Dionysus, who were impassioned by wine. These are just some forms of creative madness. And this, in my opinion, is a there's a liveliness to this, a life to this, an energy to this. And I would go as far to say it is a feminine energy. And the fact that Dionysus is mentioned really hammers this forth, because if I'm correct, and I really could do with reading more Nietzsche, when Nietzsche makes a comparison between Apollyon and Dionysian, is it art, creativity, or virtues, or something? He is talking about art, I think. The difference is between one is Apollonian is related to the god Apollo, is more masculine, and Dionysian is more feminine, I think. So yeah, this may be a symptom. What I was reading out there, it might be a symptom of in a sense, a sort of, whether literally or symbolic or whatever, you know, a theft or of feminine energy, or the masculine being put on a pedestal by comparison for a long time. And then even in the revival of female freedom, the even more feminine energy and essentially being stolen, in that women became masculinized rather than genuinely in their own way regaining their position. Now, some people might object to me saying this, especially given that I'm a man, but note that this is not, I have listened to people saying, women in the Great Awakening sort of circles saying this, and learned from them to a large extent. So this is me learning from that. So I'm not preaching in a way which is, I'm not like, you know, I respect women regaining their feminine side is there. Anyone, any individual, everyone, their rebalancing of masculine and feminine within them, those energies, and the left brain and right brain, and etc. That's their journey, right? We can learn from each other in the process and do it as a collective too. But it's not something where one person preaches to another about how they must do it. Certainly not. So, normality is an ideal fiction. The concept of madness itself can be called into question. The parallel concept of normality may also be reconsidered. Now, mental health is one thing, but madness, you know, that's very much used in a way based on unconvention, being mad, apparently. So, yeah. To cite just one example, Sigmund Freud himself claimed that normality is an ideal fiction. Other writers have worked with the problem of excessive normality and adaptation to collective norms, this itself being pathological. Yeah, like, that's what the whole persona is about. And if there's excessive adaptation in the persona to social norms, not being in touch with your subconscious, may well be the result. Makes me wonder that it's something potentially everyone might do, but because people with Asperger's, let's say, might have, well, maybe HD as well, and other certain conditions, as we develop and learn to deal with our issues, and ways in which you don't fit in, and ways in which we've been rejected socially, growing up, maybe even by our parents, in various ways, or punished or whatever, due to not fitting in. And when you finally learn ways of adapting and be considered more acceptable, you've in a sense developed this sort of persona that masks, in a sense, repressed negativity and issues that haven't really been dealt with properly. And that's unfortunate. But ultimately, everyone in our society can have this sort of issue, because there's just so much repression of subconscious content. Because a lot of these avenues, these outlets of creative expression of unconscious content, they're not really practiced so much or as much. And so people just bottle things up more. People escape into alcohol. I mean, that's the old thing. People escape into pornography or all sorts of things on the internet, all sorts of things. All this modernity provides so much ample opportunity to just escape and run from your internal issues, which doesn't help. It doesn't help one bit. People in the past, they had more opportunities to look up at the sky, which there wasn't light pollution so much then, and there were so many possibilities for people to be present with themselves. And Eckhart Tolle talks about this, how we're becoming increasingly less present as in society, and there's a certain pain that comes with not being present, and I'm well acquainted with it in that I'm still working on being present and meditating, you know, and it's an issue. It really is. There's a YouTuber who inconvenient for me, I'm not remembering right now, and he talks about Stoicism a lot. He's quite a good channel, and he talked about learning. There's a video I saw recently where he talked about what he's learned from like Asian religion and Buddhism, right? What did he say? What was it that's relevant here? Well, it was to do with, oh man, I'm sorry guys, I can't remember what I was going to say. Okay, well, this is the idea that you got to face up to this outlets, creative outlets. Well, the theme I was talking about was the sort of, what Eckhart Tolle was talking about, where there's a sort of, perhaps you could call it a madness, a common madness, where we don't have presence because so often we, well, distracted by ever more things. And I think what the Stoic YouTuber was talking about was ultimately, it's not about doing things in particular. It's about not doing. It's about, oh, here it is. That was what I was going to say. The idea is, it's all very well meditating, that you get 10 minutes out off or 20 minutes off at a time or whatever, maybe even an hour if you're really doing committed meditation. And then you get that time out from all that from the day. But maybe another more effective way to be present is to modify something you do regularly and all that time when you're not meditating. Moment to moment across the whole day, the majority of your day, what you're going to do differently in the majority of your day that makes that such that you are more present in the majority of your day. What can you do differently? Now, one thing is perhaps listen or expose yourself or read, exposing yourself to that content about being present, like really allowing your subconscious and your mind to take in the data about being present and about how you be present, about maybe reading Buddhism or listening to someone reading out about how Buddhism and mindfulness and presence and this sort of stuff, taking it in and allowing your mind to just, you're getting new data in about that. And so you might naturally start just being more present in your day to day. So it's interesting because I started watching a lot of spiritual videos, and it was great. It was great. And I know I'm not from it, but then I was like, okay, I need to start meditating more. So I started doing meditations, not every day, but most days. And perhaps this might suggest that it might be more fruitful to just listen to a lot of spiritual content, especially that which directly deals with how to awaken, how to be present in the moment, and allowing your mind to just take in that data and process it automatically, maybe on a subconscious level, such that we just naturally start changing based on a lot of exposure to it. Even just a bit or a bit, but the more exposure we have to it, the more we change. And because subconscious is very powerful, and simply what we expose ourselves to makes a big difference. And this is why something of a dopamine purge isn't the word, but basically detox. Now, essentially what we're going to do is detox our experience, what we input into our minds, because there's so much crap, right? And I wonder about how far to go with this. I mean, I did actually unsubscribe from a lot of YouTube channels that are in relation to politics and stuff. I could go even further. And what really is the test is more, what are you getting from that? What is the input that you're getting from that? How does that influence you? Is that a positive vibe, a positive influence, raising your frequency, or is it something that's ultimately a distraction? Is it also something you're doing for dopamine? That's another thing to consider. That's not saying get rid of all dopamine altogether, be completely Puritan, blah, 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 blah. No, not necessarily. Although if you want to, I'm not going to say don't do that, but I'm also not going to say do that. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable with either of those statements. Yeah, I would suggest the idea of exposing yourself. I would suggest meditating, but is it enough? Perhaps reformulating what your input is, what you're experiencing regularly on a day-to-day, moment, minute to minute, to consider how much time you spend experiencing what, and what is the frequency of that, and how much is that conducive to your growth, and how much of it. And consider, we could think of it like a mind hack. You can basically have a lot of the input being about being present and that sort of thing. And you might your subconscious is a large portion of your mind, and through the input, your subconscious might actually come up with a lot of solutions without you noticing, and you might change your behavior for the better. Whereas if you're just doing everything like normal, oh, but I'm only 10 minutes meditating, you know, like, it's like a bit of it's just an excuse on somebody. It's almost like, oh, yeah, I'm spiritual. I meditate like 10 minutes a day. Oh, well done, well done. Yeah, I know it's a bit sarcastic and that's not really fair, but I'm saying this to myself as much as I'm saying it to you guys or girls, whatever, you know, I use that very loosely. And yeah. In fact, I'm going to write this down. I have to do that before I forget. So, yeah, what am I writing down? Change input to be more present to content about being more present to rewire subconscious and your neurology as well. But you don't need to put that. And maybe you can put that in your diary or on a post-it note, put it on your forehead. People will keep reminding you of it. I don't know. The idea of doing that resonates with me, and I feel that you would benefit from that too. And a lot of people would. And that, yeah. So there you go. That's the insight that I got there. And if it doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to do it, obviously. So, where was I? Other writers have worked with the problem of excessive normality and adaptation to collective norms, this itself being pathological. The well-known psychoanalyst and psychocosmetic therapist Joyce McDowell coined the term normotherapy, normopathy to describe excessive attachment to social norms and conventional normality. And I would say people with high levels of the big five trait agreeableness might be more prone to this. Normopaths pay for their rituals of adaptation with excessive tendency towards somatization. Symptoms appear less in the psyche and they tend to be observed in the body. The term normotic, coined by the English psychoanalyst Christopher Bollas, has a similar meaning. James Hillman, 1975, defends that pathologizing is a spontaneous movement of the soul and a vital necessity of psychic life. The life of the soul includes pathologizing, but this is not a serious deviation from a type of normality that is impossible to achieve. The word pathology derives from pathos, meaning passion. The soul pathologizes as this is one of its vital movements and basic manifestations. Hillman invites us to shine a new light on psychopathology, in which pathologizing is a necessary manifestation of the soul that will always be present. Its total absence would be a type of serious psychic anemia, which would be a symptom of something serious. And consider that this sort of anemia might be more widespread now than it was in the past. Might explain some things. Similarly, Jung sought to present the extraordinary, the strange, and the unusual as a fundamental part of human experience, and something new to be incorporated, integrated, and understood by the conscious. In relation to the problem of adaptation, Jung developed his concept of the persona, a psychological artifice which we wish to show others. 1928, in particular, chapter 3, the persona as a segment of the collective psyche. Yeah, as I was saying, persona, I think I'm glad I correctly identified that. And not to pat myself on the back too much, just saying. The social mask is a segment of the collective psyche, and although it is necessary for our adaptation, if it is used to excess, it may provoke problems that will be discussed later. The persona, word derived from sonar, meaning, or sonare, meaning sound, and per, meaning through, was in fact a theatrical mask used by actors in antiquity. I'm sure you can see that image. It's like this mask with a happy or smiley face or whatever. You know, it's a well-known idea, right? The persona, that image. Theatre as a sacred ritual and prohibited to women, and men had to play both the male and female roles using large masks. We still use these today, and our everyday lives are like a masked play on a large stage. The risk of identifying with the persona and creating a dangerous fusion between our identity and our social masks is substantial. And honestly, I feel like I've been going for a while, and I'm at 48, page 48 now, so I've made a fair bit of progress with this book. Yeah, I think that was a pretty good episode. There's some really interesting content here. I don't know what to say negative about it, and I would want to be more impartial and say more negative things, but I just don't have anything. I agree with this largely, although perhaps it's just too, you could say that it's too materialist. I know it mentioned the soul, but I don't think it mentioned like this or literally, but you know, there's a value in that, and people wouldn't have taken it so seriously at the time if, or even now, you know, if Jung had been more outright, if Jung had been spiritual about that. And I don't know exactly what his real beliefs were insofar as what he truly believed spiritually, or if he put that, if that really was involved in his work. So yeah, I mean, so far, I don't have anything negative to say about this. Maybe I'm developing experience as a reviewer. Anyway, by review, so my version of reviewing is very much not an ordinary way of reviewing, and that's fine. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly did. And bye for now.